It's a common thought among people that pixel art is a medium that really doesn't extend past the world of gaming, and while yes, the by far most iconic examples of the medium come from our beloved consoles and PCs, there are many examples of the art form being utilised across media as a whole, from TV shows to movies and so on. But it's safe to say that many companies really don't understand how to properly use it, or they just can't be bothered to give pixel artists the jobs and respect they deserve. I don't know. As a recent example, look at this trash bag of an advert for the Marvels movie that came out a few months ago. It looks hideous. These things look like they're being pulled around on strings like a puppet who really needs to piss. It's awful. However, there is one show out there that really did pixel art justice, and used it to great effect to give us some amazing animation, characters, and viewing experiences as a whole. That show being Gravity Falls. And they did it twice. So let's dive into these two episodes to see how they utterly nail the pixel art style, and how they use it to tell such fun and entertaining stories. But before we get into the episodes themselves, I want to really put into perspective how much of a miracle these two episodes and their art are, and why we barely ever see pixel art used in this manner across TV and movies as a whole. The first and most basic point is that pixel art is very hard and very time consuming. And you may hear this and think, oh well, that's the same with every kind of animation or art in general, why is pixel art so special? Well, let me elaborate a bit. Modern art programs that have become the industry standard for digital art, such as Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, have many tools that are meant to make precise inputs far easier and humanly viable, such as stabilizers for brushstrokes, while the main pixel art program, Sprite, really doesn't have many features that make creating animation a more streamlined experience, meaning that it's harder to mass produce. This isn't really the fault of any specific program though, as pixel art as a whole really isn't favourable to these kinds of shortcuts, as the medium as a whole is heavily focused on precision and exact measurements. Messing up a single pixel in a line can completely break it and make the art look bad in pixel art, but in normal digital art, a single pixel isn't comprehensible at all to people, because it's so small. It's like those eyelash mites that people bring up to make others uncomfortable, like, yeah, well, when you take a fucking microscope to them, you're obviously gonna see them in all their detail and have a breakdown about it, because, ew, that's gross. But you're never gonna see them if you look at someone's eyelashes hard enough, they're too small. And this difference in scale contributes to the second issue with pixel art, and making it into any long-form content, that being the visual complexity and the differences in detail between the two. Things like 3D modelling, CGI, and other forms of modern digital art allow creators to put in so much more detail into their work that allows for not only a more accurate depiction of their artistic vision, but it also allows them to create far more expansive and amazing spectacles that can capture audiences far more engagingly. Doing anything close to this kind of shit in pixel art would take months on end, as making 24 frames of this per second, it's just not humanly viable, even with a large team. Add onto this the very tight restrictions and time deadlines that many companies put animators under already, and pixel art just isn't really possible to make into any form of movie or TV show on its own. Because if regular animation takes so long and already struggles to meet these deadlines, then pixel art is just never going to make it. Adding to this, the technical restrictions of pixel art mean that not only does the large resolution of bigger screens cause the pixels and lower resolutions of pixel art to be far more noticeable, taking away a lot of their visual appeal and impact, but the audiences are also going to be far less impressed by pixel art than the most cutting-edge CGI effects, for example. Pixel art is perceived mainly as a retro, old-school art form that thrives off its limitations and its lack of complexity. Many audiences see it as a fun, nostalgic novelty that's a joy in small doses, but doesn't inspire awe like something like CGI can. So, because of this, pretty much any company that wants to make an animated series is going to prefer to use any other form of digital animation, because it's going to be more desirable to general audiences, it can allow them to create their artistic vision in far more detail and on a grander scale, and it will be technically far easier as the software that they are most likely to use will be far more friendly and has more tools to simplify the animation process, at least to a certain extent that most pixel art platforms don't have. God, it really sounds like I'm bitching about being a pixel artist, huh? I understand that I probably sound super biased over here, moaning about how hard my art is to make compared to everyone else's, but I want to make it clear that I'm trying to tackle this from the perspective of a professional animation studio, and not some guy in his room that makes art for a hobby. I have none of the harsh time restrictions or creative constraints that these teams are going to have that work for Disney or something, so the pixel art that I make would take far less time than if they had to make it. My main point is that if this professional animation team wanted to make an animated show, and they're given given, say, 2 years to make it, they're never going to choose pixel art as the primary art form, because literally any other option is going to be better, more time efficient, and will give them the creative freedom that they need to realize their vision in a more effective way. So, with all of that said, how in the hell has Gravity Falls taken all of these warnings against using pixel art in an animated show, thrown them in the garbage, and done it anyway, and actually succeeded on top of that? Well, before we get into the episodes in more detail, let's look at the artist himself who brought them to life, Paul Robertson. This man has been arguably the most prominent figure at bucking the trend of pixel art never featuring in animated shows and movies, with his talents in pixel art animation having breached onto the big screen in 2010, with Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where he made these little cute pixel art effects that will be used across the entire movie, and he would actually go on to be one of the main artists for the Scott Pilgrim game as well. 2012 would be when Fight Fighters, the first episode of Gravity Falls to feature his art, would be released, and this really started the trend of him featuring in many popular and influential animated shows, such as Rick and Morty, Adventure Time, and even the freaking Simpsons, as you saw earlier. He's an insanely talented pixel artist, and one of the best in the industry in my opinion, with his ability to make pixels blend into these pre-established worlds in a way that makes them unique yet still immersive is really incredible. He's also had a major hand in animating for video games as well, of course, being a part of the art team for games such as Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, and even the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game as recently as 2022. So it's safe to say that if you had to pick anyone to make some pixel art for your animated show and have it work out amazingly, this guy is a pretty solid bet. So, without further introductions, let's look into these episodes themselves to see how his talents have been used in the world of Gravity Falls, starting with the first episode he worked on, Fight Fighters. Fight Fighter starts out with the gang at an old arcade with Soos, a character we'll get back to later, talking about all of the nostalgia he has for the games within the arcade, with the Fight Fighters game itself being used by Dipper and Wendy in the back, immediately showing the audience that these games are meant to call back to the prime days of the arcade. The 16-bit art style of the games, like Street Fighter 2 or other similar fighting games, mixed with the corny writing of these characters, create a very old school feel, just like how most people are going to see pixel art in general. Instead of being held back by this perception, however, it plays into it entirely and makes it entertaining to the audience using both vibrant and appealing visuals and the amazing voice work of Brian Bloom. Focusing on the visuals, of course, these initial cutscenes have this light glow to them that really gives off the feeling of staring at an arcade screen and the light is burning your eyes while you're locked in trying to kick your friend's ass, giving these sprites a further nostalgic and fun appeal to them. And of course, for the majority of this episode, McSkirmish isn't in the arcade screen, but is instead wandering around in the open with this glare on him, so how does his sprite hold up without it? Amazingly, of course. What the hell were you expecting? Let's start off with the colour palettes used here, which is surprisingly less saturated than you may expect considering how shiny it looks earlier, which I think is mainly to enable the animators to give him this shine while also not completely blinding his colour out, as making them too bright on the base sprite would just make the shiny version very messy and eye-piercing, but that isn't to say his colours are any form of compromise, far from it. The more limited palette, at least compared to what you'd expect from the highest quality pixel art, actually does a hell of a lot for the sprite, not only allowing it to fit more seamlessly into the traditionally animated world of Gravity Falls, that obviously doesn't utilise any pixel art shading techniques such as anti-aliasing, which you can learn more about in my Binding of Isaac video, but it also makes it look far more authentic to the 16-bit art style, as the technology didn't allow for massive amounts of colour or detail. The fully black outlines also help him to be a kind of a middle ground between the pixel style of these old fighting games and the Gravity Falls style, as they are shared with the actual human characters of the show. Another aspect of the colouring of Skirmish are the large groups of colours across the sprite, instead of using any dithering for its shading, which also makes it fit into the Gravity Falls art style even more, as well as making the design more readable, which reduces the complexity for the audience, making it more effective and impactful for more people, mainly those who aren't used to the pixel art style and will get confused if too many fancy techniques were used. Now on to the most entertaining part of Rumble's art, the animations, and boy is there a lot to talk about here. The sheer range of expressions within these animations are something to behold. They're all so exaggerated and full of the energy that a super corny and violent video game character should have. From his idle animation having that iconic bounciness and smoothness like most old fighting games have, to the totally not Hadouken, trademark, animation having this blindingly bright fireball and this powerful low to the ground pose that has a pretty clean line of action going through it from the tip of the fire to his shoulders, really sells its power, meaning these animations all have a very clear sense of strength and impact to them, making them satisfying to watch, especially in context as things get devastated around him. That line of action concept might be unfamiliar to some of you, so to provide a brief explanation, this line of action acts as a guide and almost like an axis for animators to use to make an action seem more natural and dynamic, as sticking to this line makes an attack, for example this flying kick, look cleaner and more compact, placing a clear emphasis on the kick and where it should be making an impact, making the posing more powerful and more believable as a result. All of these animations that can use these lines sensibly use it to great effect, making them very easy to look at as well as very impactful, really making them fun and exciting to watch as they come out. Another interesting part of many of these animations is their use of smear frames, which is a more common technique in pixel art than some other art forms, as clean motion is a bit harder to portray with the lower amounts of frames that most pixel art pieces tend to have. So these smear frames help to smoothen out the animation without jacking the frame count too high. These smear frames are used in a multitude of ways across Rumble's animations, from these smaller smears simply making the attack animations a bit smoother, to the sword swipes and the palm strikes having very extreme smears to convey their high speeds, exaggerating their movements and making them look more powerful as a result. The final small set of animations we'll touch on are these cutscene-like animations, and the reason I want to cover these separately is that the context that they're placed under are obviously very different to the rest of the animations, as they are laser focused on by these goofy black bars that force the audience to pay attention to how dramatic these moments are. So these animations need to portray this impact as much as they can. So how do they do that? Well, the main thing they do is make his hair flap around like a worm having a stroke, as well as heavily exaggerating his mouth movements like he's trying to punch you with his goddamn vocal cords. Both of these animation choices make these brief moments much more thrilling to the viewer, as it becomes clear that he's about to go fucking apeshit, and you better be ready to watch the fireworks, really upping the tension and impact of these moments, overall making them more exciting. So, to conclude our dissection of this 16-bit beefcake, his animations all do an amazing job of making his characterization of a powerful and exaggerated fighter who craves nothing but power, while staying true to the art of the show despite the art form difference, giving us a fresh and amazing episode that embraces the form of pixel art and excites everyone who watches it in the process. Now, most shows would be content with having this as the one episode with amazing pixel art and leave it there, but Alex Hirsch wasn't satisfied with that. So for season 2, Paul Robertson returned with a much more sinister creation. Yes, I'm serious. Let's get into her now, shall we? Outside of this episode somehow predicting the meteoric rise of FNAF and Doki Doki Literature Club's entire goddamn existence and theme, Giffany is by far the most recognisable thing about this episode, so let's have a quick look at her character to see how her design has to portray her. This cutesy little character's main theme is creating a false sense of security with Soos to get him attached, so that she can eventually take control of his entire life, with her actual power over any form of technology having to be hidden until the climax, and slowly shown and hinted at during the episode. Wonder where her tech abilities put her in terms of power scaling. Because of this, her design needs to hit all of these key design traits, so let's see how Robertson was able to tackle these to make an interesting and engaging character sprite. Starting with a cute and deceiving appearance, the first success that Giffany's design has in this is the grossly pastel colour palette that feels like your eyes are eating 50 kilos of sugar. It's insanely bright and over the top, which most people would see as way too much and utterly stupid. But this makes Soos' experience in this episode all that more engaging, as that desire to please his grandmother by getting a girlfriend blinds him to this highly exaggerated showcase of cuteness and an apparent lack of threat, making this whole conflict of the episode more effective using her palette. Adding to this, her accessories and outfit also extend this theme of innocence and approachability, with the bow in particular being almost a symbol of, there's nothing to worry about, I'm just a nice loving person who totally won't bury you at the first wrong word. You know, that feeling. Heck, even the first half of her animations give off this playful and fun feeling, with her having this cute little dance and these little giggles, both of these having very few frames to really make her seem like just any adorable video game character. We'll get into how the frame count of her animations changes how we perceive her later, but for now, let's take a look at how her design ties into this theme of technology and her rogue AI side. There are a few ways in which this technological side of her is portrayed, from smaller details such as the ends of her bow in her hair actually being computer cables, to the light blue parts of her design almost being like static electricity. With a very similar colour to the shocking effects we saw in Rumble earlier, these both subtly show her technical side, but I think that the most clever way that this is portrayed is by the frame count of her animations, and I'll explain why. As we discussed earlier, her early animations, while she's trying to lure in Soos by gaining his trust and adoration, have very few frames, but as the episode progresses and her more violent and evil tendencies start to show up, such as her evil past and her basically killing her creators,
so I have to delete them.
her animation becomes more detailed, with more frames and smoother execution, showing that she's far more intelligent and closer to human than we all previously thought. Adding to this, the animations get far more expressive and exaggerated, from the small mouth movements which she had when Soos was gladly playing along with her, to these massive shouting movements with sharp teeth, giving an almost stereotypically evil look to her like she's a demon, which is paired with an increased amount of shading around the eyes to make her seem even more threatening and angry. The most directly threatening animation is this one, where she slowly starts rising her head, which also uses some particle effect of electricity around her, showing how unstable she has become and that this is her complete breaking point in the episode, while actually further hinting at her control over electronics, meaning that it acts as the clearest show of her downward spiral into insanity, as well as a slight form of foreshadowing to the climax of the episode. Another aspect of her design that I would like to discuss is how it relates to the anime tropes that her character is based around, and how accurately her design portrays these tropes and traits, starting off with the typical slice of life school love interest trope. The outfit she's wearing actually has a name in Japanese, known as the Seifuku, which is a pretty generic uniform that can be seen across countless shows and animes, most notably the likes of Sailor Moon and Lucky Star, some of the most recognisable older animes in this genre. Giffany is meant to be aggressively stereotypical in her anime appearance, so that her personality can be the real subversion of expectations in her character, as well as extending her sweet outer appearance to hide her evil. So the outfit really doesn't have anything special about it, but this need to be extremely over the top yet generic to the anime trope she's based on could have created a conflict in her design. How do you make a character extremely generic and also a little too energetic to lure the characters of the show, but not most of the audience who need to sense that something is off with her? This combination of her wacky colours, exaggeration in her hair and her eyes during her animations, and many other traits, showcase this duality of both being very unassuming to draw people in, and highly energetic and erratic, which perfectly mirrors her personality as this initially charming figure that becomes terrifying and obsessive by the end. Because of all this, I believe that Paul Robertson has done an amazing job at not only showing off her fun links to technology in her design, but her character has also been shown off amazingly within it and her animations, really painting her as this unstable yet intelligent being that can snap at any moment, from being a charming and cute anime character to the sadistic rogue AI who will kill and take people's minds at will, latching on to their psyche and tendencies. Overall being an amazing example of linking a sprite into their character intelligently and seamlessly. And there you have it. Both of Gravity Falls' pixely antagonists fully analysed and appreciated. At least I hope so. This was one of my favourite shows growing up when I was like 14, with the ongoing story being just so cool to me as these episodes got released, so it really is a privilege being able to take a deep dive into this for you all. Again, I would just really like to highlight the sheer talent and work that Paul Robertson has put into this show, and the amount of life and personality that he's able to put into his work, and just how excellently he was able to weave these designs into their writing, creating some thoroughly enjoyable villains, and episodes as a whole to watch. It's not often that we get to see pixel art in any form during an animated series, and when we do, it's even rarer to see it given this much respect and attention to detail. So it is really a breath of fresh air and very inspiring to see how well the art form has performed in this show, and I'm eagerly awaiting to see when it will be perfected next. With all of that said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to zap the like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed. I am so thankful for all the recent support, and as always, I'll see you when I see you. Bye!